Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review from Forza 4, a decade ago already at this point, and this is one of those cars which some people would probably think, well, do we really need to review this from Forza 4? You've got Mazda Furais and Zonda Rs and all these LMP cars that aren't around anymore, so why on earth are you reviewing a Kia? Does anyone really even care that this car isn't in the franchise anymore? Well, it might be just me, to be fair, but I definitely do care because this is actually one of my favourite cars in Forza 4. Certainly one of my favourite undervalued performance vehicles. I really wish that they sold these Kias in the UK, but unfortunately they don't. Now these days, a lot more people have noticed Kia and Hyundai, and even some other smaller brands too, Skoda with the VRS models, because their performance cars have started to become kind of a force to be reckoned with. The Kia Stinger, for instance, is a great sports sedan, probably my favourite one on the market right now, but as far as this one goes, it could easily be taken as kind of a generic, maybe just two-door small coupe, kind of cashing in on the whole Audi TT, Toyota Celica, all that kind of group, but maybe just getting a bit late to the party. That's not the case. I would actually go so far as to say that I consider this car to be, at least in the spirit of the way it performs, kind of like a Korean Honda Integra. And although the Honda Integra is, of course, my favourite JDM car, the DC2 is a legend among front-wheel drive cars, and I would still give the Integra the edge over this, but what I mean is that there are many things that remind me of that DC2 Integra in this car. The boxy, kind of understated style, of course the front-wheel drive chassis, the smaller engine with a modest amount of power, but what it can do with that power and with that torque is actually very impressive. Now this car is dirt cheap, which isn't too surprising for a Kia. At the time especially, they didn't really have the, cash in value of a name that something like a Stinger does now, so it's 18 grand to buy it in the game. So it's actually one of the cheapest performance cars really in Forza 4. But the question is, of course, for that 18 grand, what do you actually get? Because it's an easy car for people to just completely forget about and maybe never take much note of in the first place, so what are the specs on this thing? Well, the engine is actually bigger than you might assume. It's a 2.4 litre. Interestingly, it's naturally aspirated though. You would probably assume it would be a turbo car, kind of looks like one, maybe like 200 horsepower, turbo 2-litre engine, that kind of thing, but it's not. As I said, 2.4, naturally aspirated, it is front-wheel drive, 173 horsepower and 168 pound-feet of torque. So again, very similar to the kind of specs that you would get in an older Integra. Now the weight is not as good as the Honda, but again, it's a much newer car, so of course, safety tech, that kind of stuff, it does obviously all add to the weight. And this does weigh 1,330 kilos, but because of the fact that it's got a pretty modest amount of power, it's not a crazy fast performance car, the category is pretty low. It's D level, 284 PI. So even in the D category, you've actually got quite a lot of wiggle room for tuning. You can easily take this up to D350, which is of course the limit, and you can do quite a lot to it. In that kind of difference, you could upgrade the tyres, you could drop the weight, and that is probably what I would recommend doing the most. In fact, the one that I'm driving here is actually tuned to D350. You can put it on nicer rims, drop the weight a little bit, better brakes, lowered suspension, so even without upgrading the power, you can still actually make it a pretty nice little low-level track car. But what you're thinking is of course obvious. That's all well and good, but what can it actually do? Because at the end of the day, if it was good, surely you would see plenty of people back in the day using it online. Well, that is simply not always the case. And although I'm not going to try and say that this was the best D category car out there, or even the best at any particular thing, it was definitely a contender. And a really undervalued one, because this is one of those cars that, because it's front-wheel drive, you can easily put a ton of power into it for instance, lower-level high-speed racing. So for instance, like Category C, Category D on Le Mans, for instance, you can easily control a front-wheel drive lower-level car with tons of power than you can if you tried to, for instance, take a muscle car and just focus totally on power at the expense of all handling. With front-wheel drive, even if you can't get all the power down through a corner, it tends to be a lot easier to control than a really powerful rear-wheel drive car. So for that kind of use, even then, it's a deceptively good car. Now, I don't recall exactly what the upper end potential on this thing was when you tune it up. I think it might have been somewhere between like 350 and maybe 400-ish horsepower. It might have been more, but I honestly can't remember. I think you could turbo and supercharge it, or you had the option of either, in other words. But Easily the best thing about the car is the handling manners. Not just the cornering, but the way the car feels, the proportions of the vehicle, the way it carries its weight. It does not feel like a 1330 kilo car. You could easily mistake it for 1200, which is a pretty big difference. The handling is, of course, beginner friendly. I actually really like the way it looks as well, especially in yellow, which is a pretty rare colour for it. And to me, it's the definition of a performance sleeper coupe, because it's a car that nobody used, nobody really expects it to be any good because it's a Kia at the end of the day, especially at the time in 2009, and it's just this deceptive little, really pleasant sports coupe. And of course, as I said earlier on, it's certainly not going to blow your mind. It's not some radical sleeper car that's got like 1,000 horsepower potential that can destroy everything else in the lower categories, of course not, but it is a car which deserves a lot more credit, actually, than people give it. For me, I would actually go so far as to say that my love for this car is enough that if they were sold here in the UK, I would legitimately consider buying one of these in real life. I actually like the Kia Forte that much. And for me, that is a very rare thing for me to say about a sports coupe of any kind. Pretty much this and the Integra are maybe the only two cars in that category that I would say that about. So for me, certainly I put it on a high pedestal for what it is, and as I said, this was the first time that I really took note of Kia and thought, you know what, they've got potential, and boy have they lived up to it now, because the Stinger is an outstanding car. But that's it overall for my thoughts. Of course, if you do go back to the game, be sure to check out these less valued cars. It's a perfect time to do it, especially in career mode against the AI, and give this one a try. It's not exactly like you've got to pay out a lot of money to try it at 18 grand. If you like it, great. If you don't, it's less than 20 grand that you've spent on it anyway. But that's it for this review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.